Okay, and what I want to do in this video is introduce our third factor of production that we're doing in this playlist. And again, trying to just give, I suppose, an introduction to economics and how wealth is generated and all this kind of stuff. So capital, maybe it's my own opinion, but capital is incredibly important. And as such, I'm going to split this video up into two. So this is going to be the first of two videos on capital. And as such, I'm going to call it Capital 1. So as we said, we're still talking about the factors of production. We've talked about land, talked about labour, and now we're talking about capital. And capital is anything. It's not just machines and things like that, but I suppose it'll be better if we talk about the definition. So capital is anything man-made, which, like all factors of production, is used in the production of goods and services. So for the visual learner, what we said is capital is anything man-made, which is used in the production of goods and services. That's what capital is, okay? So I'm actually recording this video on a Mac, and the Mac was something that's man-made. I've got a microphone that I've hooked up to my Mac as well. That was man-made, and I'm using these pieces of capital in order to produce this educational video, and that's the service that I'm producing is an educational video. The Golden Gate Bridge, it's something that was man-made, absolutely, in San Francisco, and it produces the service of getting across the water there by car, or I believe you can walk across it, I'm not sure, but makes it way quicker to get across the water, at least, the very least, by car. This is a solar farm in China, and what all these solar panels are man-made, and they're producing, well, they're not producing electricity. Anyone that's doing physics, they're converting light energy into electrical energy, but still that's the service of electricity. We've got these massive diggers here that are used in mining particularly, and this is actually quite important because what we've got here is the machine here is the capital and this is the labour, and that brings us on because when most bits of capital, not all, and that's true, and actually as we get more and more technologically advanced, we don't, not so much capital can actually become autonomous with like AI and, you know, what you call machine learning and all that kind of stuff. So but one of the things that I do want to bring us to, or our attention to, while I talk about even an older school bit of capital, which is an aqueduct, with the Romans built that to bring water from, you know, one place to another. But machines are essentially capital, anything man-made used in the production of goods and services. Now, forgive me, I kind of got off point there. The defining feature of capital is that it makes labour more efficient. So what we need to do now is discuss what do we mean by efficiency. Well, there's the labour, and with more capital, it's becoming more efficient. That's what we're talking about now. So, if we have this individual here and he is digging a hole with his hands. Now, the idea is, I always ask the lads in class, like, how much earth could he move in a given hour? And, you know, the kind of standard answer is not a lot, and that's a good answer. Now, that's because he has no capital. If, however, we give this guy a shovel and we ask him to dig more, how many cubic meters of soil can he move now within an hour? And at the very least, the answer is more. And that's the thing. So within that labourer's given 1 hour, it's nothing to do with that labourer's effort. What we've got is this guy can move more dirt or dig a bigger hole, or, you know, I don't know, dig a bigger foundation for a house or something quicker because he's got more capital. Now, if we keep the amount of capital the same, but we increase the quality of it, and we take the shovel away and we give him a backhoe here, a digger here, well, then the idea is that because the quality of capital has increased, this guy can now, I mean, I would imagine he could potentially, depending on the size of the building, of course, but dig a foundation definitely in a day. So, like, this has increased massively the productivity of this one worker. Now, I actually think it's very important to consider something now. So I then usually pause in class and I say, well, how many people do you think it would take with shovels to dig the amount that this guy with this digger here could dig in, let's say, a day? And, like, you know, we get random answers of between 20 and 100. So let's say it's 20. So that means that if we add this one piece of capital, that means that 19 people may lose their jobs. And then so one student said, so is capital a bad thing? And the honest answer is no, it's the best thing ever. Okay, now that doesn't mean I'm heartless. I care about when people lose their jobs and they suffer and all that. That is not something that I want to see happening at all. But the question that you then must ask is, what do those other 19 people do once they're unfortunate enough to become unemployed? And hopefully, and genuinely, not always the case, but hopefully at least the vast majority of them would go out and try and find work somewhere else. So again, production is wealth, because increased production increases consumption. So what happens to total production? Well, what we did need 20 guys to dig a foundation every day. Now that we've put a bit of capital, we only need one guy to dig a foundation every day, and the other 19 guys go out, look for work. Eventually, and it's usually quite quickly unless it's a recession, these other 19 guys will find work doing something else. So these foundations, there's one foundation being dug every day, and now the other 19 guys are producing more other stuff. So what has happened to total production in the economy? Well, it has increased. If total production has increased, what has happened to total consumption in the economy? Well, it has increased. And what has happened, if consumption increases, what has happened to total wealth in the economy? Well, it has increased. Okay, now, the thing is, capital brought that about. And I know that there is a short-term suffering, but think about this. Vast majority of people, at least in the first world, have access to a car. Either their parents have cars if you're a kid, or you have a car if you're an adult, and it mightn't be a great one, but still it's a car. Are you telling me that a good policy, an economic policy to increase our standard of living would be to ban cars? Because when cars came about, a lot of people that, took care of horses and took care of stables and all this kind of stuff lost their jobs because people stopped buying horses and started buying cars. You have to take the initial suffering. Me, you, everybody has to be willing to take the initial suffering and react rather than banning the introduction of new capital. And I've kind of lost my mind, I suppose, a little bit in many ways when we come to the different examples that I'm going to give. But I hope to make it somewhat more obvious, even if it's through silly examples in the rest of this video. So what we've got now is the different ways that we can kind of literally categorize capital. And one category of capital is fixed capital. And that's the name given to the stock of fixed assets. So what are we talking about when we say fixed assets? Well, we're talking about factory buildings or machinery. Now, I kind of did, I went overboard on this. I was just absolutely fascinated by this. This is Apple's new, it's still, I believe it's still being built now, I'm not 100% sure, but their new kind of factory headquarters, I believe in Southern California. And this is an example of fixed capital, because it's a stock of fixed assets. It's a factory building, but it's just like so brand new, and like solar panels and like really low carbon footprint, if any, absolutely incredible stuff. And then we've just got like big pieces of machinery for like mining or digging or whatever, that kind of stuff, and massively car building. And again, it was capital that allowed the huge production of cars, which causes the prices of cars to fall, makes it more affordable to the average man and woman. Okay, now this is the bit where I did lose my mind, and we're going back to the question that was given to me by one of my students, which said, so is capital a bad thing? It is absolutely not. Okay, now that's Iron Man. Okay, he is one of the Avengers, all that kind of stuff. And the question I have to ask is, this is Tony Stark, who is Iron Man. What are his supernatural abilities? And the answer is none. Okay, he's not like Superman in that he can fly or move real fast or super strength or laser eyes or anything like that, or X-ray vision. He's got none of that. His entire superpowers come from capital. And like even so his heart is a piece of capital. It was that new kind of engine or whatever it was that he created and put into himself. His suit is pure capital. So the kind of joke that I had, and it's of course not a very good one because I'm a teacher, so all my jokes are terrible, but the joke that I kind of had was, you can become a superhero if you have enough capital. So even though, yes, and it is unfortunate that people lose their jobs, the way that we in the West have become more advanced than other countries, which is absolutely changing, and we've got like Hong Kong, we've got Singapore, we've got South Korea and China massively rising. And how have they risen in standard of living? Well, free market economics, openness to trade, and the lack of willingness of governments to interfere in markets, which allows capital to be formed. Okay, and all of this stuff, the reason that we have wealth in the first world is because we have saved money, invested it in machinery, which makes labor more efficient, and as such, we can produce more, therefore we can consume more. Okay, that's the whole idea. Now, I'm trying to keep this somewhat short, but I'm sure I'm going to fail in that regard. So the next category of capital is working capital. Now, this becomes far more obvious why we make this distinction when we do Unit 2 in macroeconomics in the IB. And basically, when we're talking about working capital, just think of what firms have in their warehouse, what firms have in storage. So working capital includes stocks, okay, stuff we have in the warehouse of man-made raw materials, partly finished and finished goods. So this is partly finished here, okay. And the man-made raw materials are like stuff like wood, but it's anything in the warehouse, anything in storage. That's what we're talking about with working capital. So we've got our man-made raw materials, our processed iron ore. We've got our partly finished goods. These are all engines. They're all in the warehouse in the factory. It's in storage. And it could be used like tomorrow and then it ceases to be working capital. But if it's in the warehouse, it's working capital. So there's our partly finished goods. And then there's the finished cars that have not been delivered to the lots, the car selling lots, or the garages, or whatever word you want to use depending on where you're from. In the different parts of the country. These cars here are all finished, but they're not consumer goods yet. They are still capital because they are in the warehouse. As soon as they get onto the car selling lots, then they're no longer working capital. Okay, so really try and remember that. The last category of capital is social capital, and it refers to assets which are owned by society in general. So again, for the visual learners, social capital refers to assets which are owned by society in general. And what we think about is, we're talking about public roads, not like private roads. So I think in America you have like turnpike trusts that are privately owned. We're not talking about that, okay? It's public roads, ones that are operated by the government, public hospitals and public parks, okay? So like Disneyland, it's not social capital. It's owned by the Disney Corporation. So, and that's a park. So, but a public park, one that anyone can go into for free, even like stuff like Yellowstone National Park, all those places, even if you have to pay, they're still social capital, just to be clear, all right? But the vast majority of public parks that I've ever been in have been free. Now, kind of getting close to the end of this video, it is important to note that money itself is not considered capital, and this is a technical distinction that is almost not worth the mental effort of making it, but why not? We'll do it. Money is the means by which capital can be purchased, right? That's really, created, probably I shouldn't have put that in there, but purchased, okay? In the long run, as I've always said, and we've talked about this ad infinitum, so maybe I should shut up about it, but a country cannot increase the output of goods and services, the amount of goods and services which defines how rich a country is, by printing more money. A country needs to produce more goods and services in order to have a higher standard of living. Why? Because the more that's produced, the more that can be consumed, and that is the absolute measure of our standard of living. So it needs to produce more goods and services in order to have a higher standard of living. Now, this is actually quite important, okay, because if we have a look at these horrific working conditions that this gentleman and these gentlemen here are working in, and then we compare it to, and they have no capital, and we compare it to a situation where these guys are working in. All right, we look at a situation where very little to no capital here versus producing goods and services with insane amounts of capital. Granted, insane amounts of arable land as well, but still capital. We look at the horrible poverty that really, unfortunately, and sadly exists in the world. Comparing that to abundance. Now, I know that there are certain people that are considered poor in the West, and again, I have sympathy for them. But it is nothing compared to poverty in the third world. It is absolutely nothing. And the reason is, well, we can produce more. And how do we produce more? How do we, in general, in the West, have a higher standard of living? And I keep on saying the West, but I should say in the developed nations, have a higher standard of living than those in the non-developed nations or developing nations. The reason is we got more capital. Okay, if we produce more capital, each worker has more capital. When each worker has more capital, each worker becomes more productive. When each worker becomes more productive, more is made in the economy. When more is made in the economy, more can be consumed in that country, and this means on average that everyone is richer. Okay, the defining feature of capital is that it makes labour more efficient, and a more efficient workforce means more is produced, which means more can be consumed.